Zanzibar is an archipelago lying off the coast of East Africa in the Indian Ocean. Archipelago meaning that it is a collection of islands. The largest islands are Unguja, which is 35 kilometers off the coast of mainland Tanzania, and Pemba, which sits 50 kilometers north of Unguja. There are also dozens of other very small, mostly uninhabited islands that make up the archipelago. Often when people say Zanzibar, they are referring to Unguja, which is home to the archipelago's capital, the variously called Zanzibar town or Zanzibar city. Zanzibar is not an independent country, but rather a semi-autonomous part of Tanzania, which has its own separate government called the Revolutionary Government of Zanzibar. The country is named after the Arabic word Zanzibar, which stems from the Persian Zangbar, Zang meaning black and Bar meaning coast. The Zanzibar archipelago lies near the equator, so it has a tropical climate and is warm all year round. Zanzibar is home to one of Africa's rarest primates, the Zanzibar red colobus monkey, and also the critically endangered Zanzibar leopard and the recently discovered Zanzibar servaline genet. The smaller island of Chumbe is home to Zanzibar's first marine reserve and accounts for 90% of all hard coral species that have been recorded in Eastern African reefs. Over 400 reef fish species live there, and it's an important feeding ground for the hawksbill and for green turtles. The total population of Zanzibar is around 1.5 million people. Almost all of its inhabitants are Muslim, with a small Christian minority. Many local residents, especially in tourist areas, speak some Arabic, English, Italian or French, but the main language is Swahili, specifically a dialect of Swahili called Kiangaja, which is considered to be a classical and more elevated form of the language. Zanzibarians have a relatively good standard of living compared to rural parts of Tanzania. However, there are considerable disparities in the standard of living for inhabitants on different Zanzibari islands, as well as between its urban and rural populations. In 2015, about 30% of the total population in Zanzibar was recorded as living below the poverty line. Roughly half of all Zanzibar children will complete primary school, and students are more likely to continue on to secondary school than if they were living on the mainland. Despite this, unemployment of educated Zanzibari youth remains high. The government of Zanzibar has repeatedly declared its commitment to reducing poverty. In 2016, a universal old age pension was introduced for men and women over the age of 70, though it was for a modest sum of 20,000 Tanzanian shillings, which is less than $10 per month. Some common Zanzibar dishes include Zanzibar pizza, which is ground meat, eggs, vegetables and sauce wrapped in pastry, urjo, a soup made of bajas, mashed potatoes, raw mango, chili garlic and coconut chutney, coconut bean soup, similar to a stew with cornmeal, millet, rice, cassava, plantains, goat meat, yogurt, beans, fish and coconut, and the Zanzibar and Tanzania staple, ugali, water, salt, finely ground white cornmeal and butter, all served alongside meat, stews, greens or soured milk. The official currency of Zanzibar is the Tanzanian shilling, however the tourism industry prefers US dollars. Zanzibar is sometimes referred to as the Spice Islands. The fortunate combination of moderate rainfall, a mild climate, and fertile soil made it an ideal place to grow cloves and other spices, thus earning it its nickname. From the beginning of the 19th century to the mid-1970s, Zanzibar exported a large proportion of the world's supply of cloves, and the island's economy was based largely in this commodity. Unfortunately, the world market price for cloves fell dramatically in the 1980s. Cloves are still produced in Zanzibar, but they only account for about 8% of the world's supply. Since the fall of cloves, Zanzibar's exports have evolved into coconut products, seaweed, and other spices such as cinnamon, nutmeg, and black pepper. The other major pillar of Zanzibar's economy is tourism. The islands boast beautiful beaches and clear warm waters that are perfect for snorkeling and scuba diving. Resorts and restaurants are quite affordable, with a night in a luxury 5-star hotel starting at around $200. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a massive effect on the country's tourism industry, forcing businesses to shut down in 2020 and causing the archipelago's gross domestic product growth to decelerate. The presence of stone tools suggests that the first human inhabitants arrived in Zanzibar at least 20,000 years ago. Early visitors likely came from Mesopotamia and Egypt around 3000 BC, followed by the Phoenicians and then the Romans and Greeks, who went in search of tortoiseshell, ebony and ivory. The first people to settle in Zanzibar were the two Bantu-speaking groups from the mainland. These were the Hademu and the Tambatu. In the 7th century, a small number of Persians likely relocated to Zanzibar due to unrest in their own country, and they brought with them the religion of Islam. They are also the ones who gave the islands the name Zanzibar. Over the next few centuries, trade between Africa, the Middle East and Asia increased. By the close of the 10th century, Zanzibar was one of the central Swahili trading towns. In the 15th century, Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama arrived on the islands, thus beginning its European influence. In the early 16th century, Angaja became part of the Portuguese Empire. 3 years later, they would also conquer the island of Pemba. Zanzibar remained a possession of Portugal for almost 2 centuries. However, Portugal did not closely manage the islands. Oman raided the Portuguese settlements, and the last of the Portuguese settlers were finally ousted in 1698. With Oman in charge, Zanzibar quickly became a major hub for the slave trade, and by the mid-19th century, tens of thousands of slaves passed through the port annually. In the 1820s, Zanzibar's clove industry was further developed, and many locals were becoming wealthy by supplying a tremendous amount of ivory to America and Europe. Zanzibar's increasing trade and growing population created its own problems. Frequent bouts of dysentery, smallpox, and cholera swept through the islands. The slave markets officially closed in 1873 with the Anglo-Zanzibari Treaty, although one of the main effects of that was to simply drive up the price of slaves, and trade continued in a clandestine manner until its final abolition in 1890. In 1891, Zanzibar became a British protectorate. In 1896, the British would go to war with Zanzibar over its new leadership. The conflict that ensued would become known as the Anglo-Zanzibar War. This was the shortest military conflict in history, lasting only between 38 and 45 minutes. During this time, 500 Zanzibari men and women were killed or wounded. By the 20th century, the island's importance as a commercial centre was declining, since their ivory supply was drying up and slavery had been abolished. After World War II, Britain gradually allowed the local people of Zanzibar to become involved in the island's government, and in 1957, Zanzibar's first democratic elections were held. Britain realised that the internal self-government of Zanzibar was inevitable, and this was finally granted in 1963. In 1964, the largely Arab Zanzibari government was overthrown by the mainly African Afro-Shirazi Party, or ASP, in alliance with the left-wing multiracial Umma Party. In just one night, more than 17,000 Arabs and Indians were killed. Most others fled immediately, leaving behind their property to be nationalized. ASP leader Abeid Karume became the country's new president and head of state, naming it the People's Republic of Zanzibar. Over on the mainland, President Nyerere of Tanganyika approached President Karume to discuss a political union. The two joined to form the United Republic of Tanganyika and Zanzibar in 1964, renaming the country again to Tanzania, Tan coming from Tanganyika and Zan from Zanzibar. Nyerere became the president of the new state, while Karume became vice president. In 1972, Karume was assassinated, and Aboud Yumbe Mwinyi became the new leader of the revolutionary government. In 1977, the ASP united with Nyerere's party, the Tanzania African National Union, to form Chama cha Mapinduzi. The new party has never lost an election, and the opposition has continually accused them of cheating. These accusations usually lead to political violence, and protesters being arrested, beaten, or killed. Unsurprisingly, the Chama cha Mapinduzi again won the 2020 elections after thousands of people were unable to register due to the Zanzibar ID document requirements.